Okay, here we go. Let's try that again. Welcome everybody. SPED 556, Trends and Issues in Special Education. Before we get started going over the syllabus, and I also want to hear from Daniel and Tara and Jessica and McKenna, because I didn't hear from you all last night. I'll ask you just to give a brief introduction, but before we get to that, as I said in my email, I thought about kind of the concerns that were raised last night, and for those of you who weren't able to attend last night, the concerns were primarily about me changing the time from the normally scheduled Tuesday meeting day into 2 meeting days, Wednesdays and Thursdays, which was a lot for some people, and I totally understand. This is just partly due to my naivete that I thought that, by virtue of the fact that you're in this program, that you would have the flexibility to meet kind of any day in the week between 5 and 7, but that was an incorrect assumption, so I apologize. And also, it was never communicated to me that Tuesday was like this agreed upon time that would continue, and so apologies. So what I did last night and this morning is I went through and was able to make it to work out. I was able to retool the schedule, so now we will only meet on Wednesdays, okay? And it's actually going to result in the exact same number of meetings that we had using the other schedule. So we'll meet 5 times. So we'll meet, 5 days out of the 10-week term.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, and again, I appreciate everyone being very candid and letting me know that that didn't work, because really it's my goal to work around your schedules to the greatest extent possible. So as I said in my email, you saw the dates. We'll just alternate. Every other Wednesday will be devoted to one class versus the other. And again, I also, sat down with the dean of the College of Education and some other faculty members, and I was actually mistaken in something that I said last night. And what I said was that based on the number of credit hours for these courses, they're either 3 or 2, that a certain number of face-to-face meetings are required, and that was an incorrect assumption, or that was an incorrect statement. I was using information that I learned about our hybrid Masters of Arts in Teaching program, in which there is a required number of face-to-face hours based on the number of credit hours. Our program is different. It's not a hybrid program. It's a fully online program. And so really, these face-to-face meetings aren't a requirement by the state of Oregon. They're just something that, me as an instructor, I feel are important, and I would assume that a lot of you also enjoy the opportunity to interact and ask questions and to have discussions on the material that we'll be covering. And so again, don't worry about, if you can't make it on some days. As you saw in an email that I just sent regarding our class last night, I have successfully learned how to upload videos onto YouTube. So all of our discussions will be available to you on YouTube. And I'll create a folder that has a document that will include all of the links to our class meetings. And I tested them, they work fine. And I'll also be sending them to our disability support staff here. And what they'll do is they can add nice closed captioning, because YouTube doesn't always do a good job with the closed captioning. So great. Any questions regarding that? Good. Well, I'm glad that I was able to make things work out for you all. And thanks again for being very candid with me and expressing your concerns, because that's stuff that as a new instructor, a new professor, I need to know. And it's partly based on the fact that in my PhD program, it was a brick and mortar type program. So like, you had to come to the class meetings at the time that they were scheduled. And so it was kind of partly me bringing that experience into the program. But we've got it taken care of, so let's not dwell any longer on it. So yesterday, for those of you who were not able to attend, McKenna, Tara, Jessica, and Daniel. I asked everybody just to briefly provide an introduction, specifically telling me what your current position is, what school you work at, what district is that school in, whether or not you work in general education. I mean, most of you have, I'm assuming. You have, by virtue of the fact that you're in this program that requires a teaching license. The number of years that you've been in special education, and then why you decided to make the transition is something that I'm interested in. So Daniel, I'm going to go ahead and start with you because I have you at the top of my list.
Cool. Hi. So
And if you forget all my
Daniel.
questions, just ask me to remind you, and I will do that.
Okay, cool.
Cool.
So I'm Daniel. I've been in special education this is my 4th year.
Okay.
Before that, I was a 2nd grade teacher for a year in Salem.
Okay.
And oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was sorry.
Oh,
I was
okay.
just looking at my other screen. I'm filling out a little spreadsheet so I can remember this stuff.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
So currently I'm working in a self-contained classroom. It's like a life skills classroom. Most of our students have autism. A couple have like communication devices. And in the past, we've had students with like feeding protocols, stuff like that.
Okay. What is the age range of the students that you work with?
Yeah, we have kindergarten through 5th grade.
Okay.
And I really like my current job, and that's part of the reason that I'm making the switch is I love being an assistant, but eventually I'd like to, be able to buy a house, have a family, that kind of thing. So trying to spread out a little bit more and go into teaching instead of being an assistant.
And what was the name of the school, Daniel? Sorry, I didn't catch that.
Oh, I didn't say that. I was trying to remember the other questions. I work at Hogan Cedars Elementary. It's in Gresham Barlow.
Okay. Gresham Barlow.
And then were there any other questions or did I get them all?
You got them all. So good memory.
Okay. Cool. Thank you.
No problem. So it looks like both Lori, and you are working in a life skills program. So that's great. I expressed to Lori yesterday that a lot of my work has been working with kids in the area of transition, so more young adults, a bit closer to graduation, but certainly life skills is an important part of that. So it's great to hear that, these, this is being kind of targeted and these skills are being targeted and taught at such a young age, right? Because IDEA requires that transition plans be implemented at the age of 16, and that's often not enough time to address the multitude of needs that a lot of these students might have. So, well done, Gresham Barlow. Okay, next up the bat I have Tara. Hello, Tara. Nice to meet you.
Hi.
So did you were you able to hear the questions?
Yes, I was.
Okay.
I had to log out and then log back in for my camera to come up for some reason.
Okay.
I got it now. So, I currently work at a K through 3 elementary school in Athena, Oregon. It's in the Athena Weston School District. It's very small. And I worked last year as a life skills instructor at our local high school, still with Athena.
Mm-hmm.
I have worked as a parapro for 7 years, but specifically in special ed. And then I got my teaching license and went right into this program to get my special ed license so that I can be a special ed teacher, not just a parapro.
Right. Cool. And were you in general education beforehand, or did you start off as a paraprofessional?
I started as a long-term substitute paraprofessional, and I started the second week of school, and I worked that whole year.
Okay.
And I was still in college, and I was like, oh, this is okay, like I didn't mind it. And then I ended up loving it.
Mm-hmm.
I was hired the next year and there for 7 years in special ed as a parapro. So
cool.
Yeah,
Did you by chance get your teaching credential from here?
I did.
Okay.
Through the, it was called the Quest program that was it was with Pendleton, Oregon. So I stayed in Pendleton and then took classes through Eastern, and we had instructors in Pendleton.
Great. Cool. Well, it's nice to meet you, and thank you for sharing.
Thanks. Nice to meet you.
Okay, Jessica, I have you up next.
Okay, here we go. I'm figuring it out, you guys, I swear. Okay, I'm Jessica, and I like Amy and Kim. I'm in the South Lane School District in Cottage Grove. I work at Al Kennedy High School, which is an alternative high school.
Mhm.
So, you know, it's a small rural town. There's one big high school, Cottage Grove High School, and then there's the alternative high school. I work there.
Okay.
It's pretty small. You know, we have like up to 80 kids. I think right now we're around like 60 something, 70 something. This was my first teaching job I've ever had. Is teaching
Okay.
there. I've been there for, I think this is my 5th year, 6th year.
Okay.
I originally went to school to get to teach elementary school. I'm like, I'm going to teach 4th grade. This is what I want to do with my life. And I did that. And then I ended up getting my first job at Kennedy. And I haven't left since. And you couldn't pay me to go anywhere else. I love it a lot. And so about 3 years ago, our special education teacher and GED teacher, she became a principal. So there was a gap in our school, and we needed a special education GED teacher.
Mhm.
And they said, hey, you know, we're having a hard time finding these people. I think you would be great at it. Would you like to do this? And I wasn't sure at first, because I knew once I became, you know, a special education teacher, especially a special education teacher at Kennedy, that is where I would be, you know, because it's the job that no one really wants for some reason. I don't know why. I love it, and it's super fun. I get to work with all kinds of kids. I get to kind of have a say in a lot of big decisions that happen at the school, and yeah, got it.
Excellent. Well, I can relate to the comment that you just made. It's a job that not a lot of people are interested in. You know,
Right.
it certainly takes a certain type of person to be in this field.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I did a lot of work, a lot of early intervention work. So working on social and cognitive and motor skills of children with autism. And you know, after about 5 years or so, I did a lot of training of our new therapists. And you know, there's definitely a type that can do it, and there's a type that just doesn't have kind of that innate ability. Like, you know,
Right.
often
Well,
I would see the kids wouldn't buy in. Like, this
Mhm.
person is trying very hard, but it's just kind of something about the person that just doesn't sit
Yeah.
well. And so,
Yeah. I mean, what's interesting, before I became a teacher, I worked at a preschool, and I was the one that was in, if there's a alternative preschool, you know, it's like the kids that couldn't be in the class with the other kids, you know, they're like, Jess, you work great with these kids. And then I had my own separate kind of, you know, room with the kids. A lot of them, you know, had autism or other kinds of special needs. And so then now looking back, I'm like, you know what, this is where it was meant to be, because I've always done this. I've always worked well with this population since forever. So good fit.
awesome. Well, thank you. Okay, and last but not least, McKenna.
So I'm McKenna. I'm currently in my 2nd year teaching special education in Kennedy High School in Mount Angel. We're a really small school, so they call it the resource room, but I'm actually the teacher of any child on an IEP. So that could mean obviously many things. I got into special education, actually similar to Jessica. I went to school to be an elementary school teacher. And as I was just about to graduate, I went to a couple job fairs, and majority of my resume was special ed work. And so the superintendent of my district kind of read over it and recruited me and asked me if I'd be interested in just starting in special education. And knowing that that was my end goal, I was like, sure, like that sounds fun. And I actually love it at the high school level. I thought I like wouldn't really care for it, being that I'm like pretty young, so I'm not very much older than my kids.
Right.
But they're awesome. Like they all respect me and they all listen to me and they do their jobs. But I'm still at like an age where I'm super relatable to them. So it works out.
No, that's kind of one thing. Well, so I started off working with children, but then I started working with young adults. So recent high school grads, and then, you know, some kind of in early adulthood, 20s. But yeah, you know, while I had fun with the children, I very quickly realized that I just could relate more to kind of the older, the kind of the older segment of the population. You know,
Yeah, and
early adults.
last year, my first year of teaching, I was the special ed teacher and the transition program teacher.
Mm-hmm.
So I had like ages 14 to 21 in my room.
Yeah.
So that was interesting. I mean, it still worked out great. Like my kids were awesome and they all listened to me very well, but it was very interesting to only be, 2-3 years older than my oldest student.
Right.
And try to figure out what that boundary is when you're trying to be a teacher, not a friend.
You're a peer model.
It was hard. But this year we separated the program. We just have too many kids now.
Okay. Cool. Nice to meet you all. And so today, what I thought we would do, so as I mentioned, I changed the syllabus just to reflect our new schedule. So we'll just have a quick look at that. I'd like to go over the assignments that will be asked of you for this course, and give you all opportunities to ask questions and whatnot. And then, since we're going to be talking about trends and issues in special education in this class, I thought a fun activity to get us started, kind of going down this road, would be to hold a debate. And so here's what I envision. We're going to be talking about kind of one of the first issues that kind of came up in special education that was kind of, questioned and looked upon in a critical light. And that's the debate between inclusion and the separate classroom. So certainly, for a very long time, as you are all aware, special education mostly took part away from the general education setting. And certainly, there are still living proponents of that model. And we'll talk about, I don't want to, share too many of the goods right now, because I'm going to ask you all to work together in groups to kind of, basically develop a position. So what I'll do is I'm just going to kind of randomly assign you into groups, and half of you will be proponents of the inclusion approach to education, and the other half of you will be proponents of the separate classroom, or the segregated classroom, segregated approach. But we can talk a bit more about that once the time comes. And one cool thing about Zoom is I can put you in breakout rooms, and I can just have Zoom randomly assign you to breakout rooms, and so you all will be separate in your groups. And myself as the host, I'm kind of like God. I can just peek my head into each group and kind of see what's happening, and answer any questions or anything you all might have. And once we do that, I'll ask somebody to kind of present your position, and then hopefully it'll fuel an interesting discussion. Because certainly this debate between inclusion and, call it exclusion, or the separate classroom, is only one among many issues in special education that, when you look at like research literature, you find kind of heated conversations regarding, one position versus the other. But before we do that, I'm going to take over the screen and pull up the syllabus. Okay, so you all should now be seeing. Oh, Okay, is that visible to everyone? Okay, great. So you're all familiar with Canvas. I'm not going to go through the nuts and bolts. I'll just get right down to the fun stuff, starting with the syllabus, and it's available here. So I do have office hours, and I didn't mention this last night. I know that you all are remote, but if you ever want to, schedule time with me, during my office hours, which are Tuesday 1 to 3, Wednesday 3 to 5. I mean, I know that you all work, so probably that first time slot's not going to be too doable. And also by appointment. So, if you want to talk about something, if, I said something that was unclear, which unfortunately, happens to the best of us. If you want, further information about something that we discovered or discussed in class, I'm flexible about, setting up a time for a one-on-one Zoom meeting in order to, answer questions or really, anything that you might want to talk about. So know that that's available to you. So we're going to be addressing current and critical issues that are pertinent to education of learners with disabilities or to the field of special education. And so part of the title of this class is trends. So there are issues and there are trends. And so kind of trends are referring to kind of the, the direction that we might see special education going. And so, when we talk about the assignment that you're going to be held responsible for completing, it doesn't have to be like a historical issue that you cover. It could be something that you find interesting that you, based on your experience or the research that you'll do for our assignments that you see as a possible kind of, direction that special education is heading. An example of this, kind of a current trend, is the use of basically the use of like punishment in the classroom. What's the other word that I'm looking for? Punishment or like
Consequence.
restraint. Discipline is the word that I'm looking for. Not punishment is very negative connotation. Discipline. So it's certainly been a debate that has a historical kind of foundation. People have been on kind of one side of the coin versus the other. But it's something that, with the next reauthorization of the IDEA will kind of be a very kind of focal kind of change, right? The move is away from discipline, kind of introducing a negative consequence for, an undesirable behavior, moving more towards positive behavioral intervention and supports. So the reinforcement of the kind of the behaviors that we want to see in the classroom. So that's just one example of like a trend that the field is moving into. So here you see the requirements and the percentages of the total grade that each of the articles or each of the assignments consists of. So I'm going to ask you to do 3 article reviews. 2 of the articles I will assign to you, so you don't have to go through any difficulty or use any of your time researching and locating an article. And so these articles are actually on the topic of inclusion versus the separate classroom. They were written in 2015. One of them by a gentleman with the last name of Kaufman. He is on kind of the latter side of the debate. He is a proponent of maintaining an approach to special education that does include kind of some element of a separate classroom instructional approach. And then we'll read another article by a woman with a researcher with the last name of Vaughn, and she's fully on the opposite side of that coin. And this article is about like how special education research actually informs and it can improve instructional methods in general education. So they do represent 2 kind of the polar opposites of this debate, of this continuum. So those will be the 2 that I have assigned and that you won't have to locate. And you'll have to do a third one. And this is going to require you to find your own article. And ideally, this article is going to be on a topic that you are interested in. Maybe you work with, kids with autism, and you have an interest in, teaching social skills to kids with autism. Certainly, there is a debate in the field of special education about, well, what is the best way of going about do this, and what is the best way of going about doing this, and what are the most effective approaches for building these skills in children and adolescents and even young adults on the spectrum. So the main project is going to be an annotated bibliography, and I should just pull up the description here since I'm talking about the assignments. And again, all of the assignments can be found either here in the syllabus module or the syllabus tab. And are you all still seeing Canvas now? Because sometimes Zoom makes me, okay, good. I won't even go there. Or you can just go to the assignments here as well. And just real quick, let me go over just in a bit more detail what I'm asking for you in these articles. So for each article, I'm going to ask you to do 3 things, and they should be 2 to 3 pages. You might find that after 2 pages, you still have a lot to say, and that's fine. You may find that 2 pages is already a stretch to achieve, and that's fine too. If you want to write more, I'm not going to dock you for going over 3 pages. But a pretty basic set of requirements. Just summarize the main points of the article. What was the author's position? Did the author provide any evidence in support of that position? And then importantly, what is your position on the article? Do you agree with the person? Do you not agree with what the author has proposed? Maybe say why. And then lastly, reflect on its relevance to your work. Is it something that is relatable? Is it something that you have some experience with, and so you are you hold a very strong position one way versus the other? Again, these assignments weren't created to be really challenging, really super challenging. Really just the main kind of goal here is to get you kind of thinking about kind of engaging with these issues that are prevalent within the field of special education. And so those 3 points are going to be the same kind of requirements that I'm going to be asking of you for each of the article reviews. Okay. So assignment number 2, the trends and issues in special education list. So this is going to be a very easy assignment. I'm just going to ask you to sit down and think about, and you might have to do a bit of research, and I provided one resource here, the Council for Exceptional Children's website. You're going to just come up with 10 issues or trends in special education that you think are important. Okay? And again, emphasis on trends and issues that you think are important. It might not be, the trends or the issues that you find important might not be, those that are recognized in the larger kind of special education field, and that's fine. But certainly I'm assuming that, that some of the things that you come up with, some of the topics, some of the trends, the issues that you come up with for this assignment will be those that are kind of recognized and that are, considered kind of important areas for debate within the field. And again, this is just going to be a list. You're just going to generate a list of 10 topics. And one more detail that I would like to mention. The top 3, the first 3 in this list should be, kind of your first, the topic that is kind of most passionate or most relevant to you. Number 2 should be the one that, would be kind of second most, and number 3 would be the one that would be like third most. Because once we all have our list, once you all have your list compiled, what we'll do is I'll have you share them with the class, and we'll do this next week. And it's going to form the foundation for the big assignment for this class, and that is an annotated bibliography. So once you decide on your topic for this assignment, I'm going to ask you to research and locate 10 articles or 10 resources. They can be, excuse me, you know, peer-reviewed research articles, which is kind of like the ideal that I would like to see. They don't necessarily have to. They could be, you know, maybe you find a blog on the Council for Exceptional Children, or a blog, you know, from a teacher who kind of works in the same field as you. I would allow those to pass because they are, you know, important sources of information. They could be book chapters. Certainly, that would be an acceptable form of a resource. And so you're going to find 10 of these, and you will basically read each of the resources, and you will provide a brief annotation of the resource. Is anyone here unfamiliar with what an annotation is? If you have heard of what an annotation is, shake your head yes. Good. So just a very brief summary, okay? And I have actually, in the files section, an example. So this is essentially what I would like the annotated bibliography to look like. You'll notice first, we have a reference that is formatted in accordance with the standards set forth by the American Psychological Association, so APA. I know that you went over AP format with Michael. Oh, Aaron, are you raising your hand?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes.
I've written down annotated bibliography twice. Once after you talked about the two articles assigned with the review, and
Yes.
then one article of our choice. Did we need to do an annotated bibliography of the article of our choice?
So yeah, so that's a good point. I'm assuming that the article of your choice will be an article that is in line with the issue or the trend that you want to produce the bibliography about.
So we
However,
don't need to do a full review of the article
no.
of our choice?
No, you will need to do a full review of the article of your choice. But I'm not going to prevent you from also using that article as one of your 10 resources for this activity, for this assignment. Obviously, it would be shorter because the annotation shouldn't be 2 to 3 pages long.
Okay, so just so I have this correct,
Yes.
2 articles assigned with review that you've assigned,
Correct.
1 article of our choice with review,
Correct.
an annotated bibliography of the review of our choice, the 10 issues in SPED with the list, the top 3 most relevant, and
Yes.
then the additional 10 resources in SPED with the annotated bibliography, and we can use the 1 article of our choice as
one of those.
I got it.
Right. So just
Okay.
a bibliography that will include 10,
Okay.
the 3 reviews, and then just a list.
Okay.
That's everything.
Okay. Your syllabus just, I think, looks different from what your syllabus looks different from what you're showing. And I think it's because your files are open, like your assignments are open, and we can't see that. Like you have stuff that's unlocked that we don't get to see.
Yes, that's because all of the assignments are set to unlock after we're done meeting today. So after we're done here today at 7 p.m., every assignment will be unlocked and you can get started on any of them. Because that was kind of another thing that came up last night. I had like assignments locked until a certain point in the term.
Right.
And somebody was like, well, you know, actually, sometimes I'm very busy and sometimes I have a lot of free time. And when I have a lot of free time, I like to kind of get ahead.
Catch up.
And
Right.
that made perfect sense to me. And so I made those changes in our previous class in collaboration and consultation. And I also changed it here.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, so after we're done tonight at 7 p.m., all of the assignments will be open. You can explore them. And you know, if anything is unclear, if you're seeing inconsistencies between what's on Canvas and the syllabus, do let me know.
The article review does not include the annotated bibliography.
No, for the self-selected one?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, you'll just choose an article and write a 2 to 3 page review of it. And that's all that's required of you for that assignment.
Okay.
But what I was saying, and this is probably where the confusion is coming up, is that you can in turn use that article as one of your
So, okay.
10 references in the bibliography.
Okay. It was just skipped. Got it.
Yeah, no, it's good that you asked for clarification because, you know, in my mind, everything is coming through loud and clear, but that's not always the case for those on the receiving end. Okay. Oh, sorry. So again, we'll just look at this example just one more time real quick. And again, it's just the APA reference and then a brief summary, right? And so here's something what like my professors always told me when I was getting my master's, when I was getting my undergraduate degree, PhD. This summary should be written at the level that would allow your grandmother to understand it, right? It should be, you know, accessible to the layman. It doesn't have to be real technical. And so what I don't want you to do is to get a bunch of peer-reviewed articles and then just kind of copy and paste in the abstract, because the abstract can be kind of a technical summary. And I'm not really looking for that here. Like you don't, you know, if you chose a paper that talked about a research study, you know, the annotation doesn't have to go into all the details of the research methodology and the characteristics of the sample. That's really not the point of this. It's more of just a kind of a high level, you know, summary of the article that, you know, were I to read it, I would be like, oh, that is a very interesting article. And, you know, based on this very brief summary, this annotation, this is something that I might be interested in looking, you know, into in more depth. So that's really what I'm looking for. Again, you know, a paragraph like you see here. This is like 4 or 5 sentences. Okay. So any questions on the assignments? Okay, great. So now we'll just look at the syllabus again, and we'll just look at our class meeting times, and you'll kind of get an idea of what we're going to be doing. Okay, so I would like for you by next week to read the Kaufman article. That's the first assigned article for review. It's 5 pages long, so it's not too heavy. And have the review done by the end of next week. And also the trends and issue list also done by the end of next week. If you're having trouble meeting that deadline, that's fine. You know, I'm flexible again. Oh, wait. Oh, I found an error here. Sorry. No, Vaughn. Okay, sorry. I was just confused. So yeah, we're going to have an assignment due on the 2nd and also an assignment due on the 9th. And those are going to be the first 2 reviews of the articles. The Vaughn article is a bit longer. It's like, I think about 15 pages. And what we're going to do, you'll turn them in, and then on the days that you turn them in, or, you know, if you can't get them turned in on the day that they're due here, at least read the article before we meet in person. Because what we'll do is we'll spend some time in class kind of discussing the article. And I'd like to kind of hear your thoughts and perspectives on it. You won't have to give like a formal presentation or anything, but it'll just be helpful to be prepared by having done the reading. And again, the 9th, we won't have an in-person meeting. So you'll have kind of the whole week to do the 2nd article review. Oh, and I did mention, or maybe I forgot to mention, that also by next week, ideally have your list completed for the 10 kind of topics that you might be interested in researching. On the 30th, so I'll have you turn in by the 23rd the review of your self-selected article. And then on the 30th, I would like for you all to just give a brief presentation on your article. It doesn't have to be anything formal. Like, you don't have to prepare a set of PowerPoint slides if you don't want to. If you want to, that's great, but that won't be required of you. and like I said, like 10 minutes, you'll just give us the high level summary. I mean, you could even just read your review if you wanted to, if you had it done. That would also be fine. Which to give us an all, you know, I think it's important for all of us as a class to kind of, you know, be, you know, to be informed with respect to kind of the area that you'll be focusing on for your annotated bibliography assignment. So on the 16th, we won't be meeting, but I do have 3 readings assigned here. And the reason that I'm going to have you read these, you won't have to do anything with them, just read them, because the following week, on the 13th, what I'll be doing is giving a kind of a brief presentation, or you know, it won't necessarily be brief. I'll make it a bit longer on issues, basically kind of issues associated with autism spectrum disorder. So we'll talk about kind of how over the course of history, the definition of what autism is and the criteria by which autism is diagnosed has changed. And we'll consider kind of how these changes are associated with and can, you know, partially account for this epidemic that we've heard of with regards to the diagnosis of autism. I'm sure most of you, or probably all of you, have heard of the autism epidemic, right? That all of a sudden, like, there are just a bunch of kids with autism. Like, what's happening? I mean, this is certainly a current issue in special education in the field of autism. And then we'll talk about some of the assessment issues in the field of autism, specifically in the area of social skills and social cognitive ability. This is definitely another area within the field that is kind of ripe with debate. And so this is an area that I've kind of focused on in my PhD. So I thought it would be interesting and, you know, productive to share some of my knowledge in the area and to, you know, again, kind of engage in another discussion about, you know, an area of debate within the field. And so the 13th will be our last in-person meeting. I'm going to give you, well, we'll meet one more time at the end of the term to present the annotated bibliographies. But since I do understand that researching and locating 10 articles, reading those articles can be a time-consuming process, especially since you all are working and have full-time jobs, many of you have families. So I'd like to give you just 2 weeks to focus on that assignment. We won't be meeting on the 20th or the 4th of December. You know, certainly I would advise against putting it off until then. I think, you know, kind of chipping away at it slowly but surely is a good approach, and then kind of using these 2 weeks to really sit down and kind of grind out some of these annotations. And then we will meet in person on the 11th, and you all will get the opportunity to share your bibliographies with the class. So, you know, by this point, we will know what your topics, we as a class will know what everyone's topics are going to be. So this will be a good opportunity for you to kind of share some of the findings from your research. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to compile the entire set of annotated bibliographies into a single document, and I'll put it on Canvas. So, you know, maybe you might be interested in downloading it and having like a very kind of handy resource at your disposal. You know, in the case that you know, you might be interested in kind of exploring some of these issues more further in the future. So again, we'll have 5 class meetings and 5 weeks in which we don't have class meetings. And those are indicated by the A's and the S's after the dates. The S's mean we meet in person, or online, excuse me. The A's mean that we won't be meeting online. Okay. So having said all of that, are there any questions? Outstanding. Okay.
Hi, so I just wanted to say hi. I popped in while you were here. While
Hey,
you were
Rachel.
talking. So is that the new updated one?
Yeah, so the new revised syllabus is on Canvas for this course.
Okay.
I'm still in the process of revising the one for collaboration and consultation, but I'll have that done tomorrow.
Okay.
So I apologize if you already downloaded the syllabus and printed it, my bad. But
That's okay.
you know, you will need to refer to the new revised one. And I'll send out a message to you all via Canvas once the new syllabus for collaboration and consultation is uploaded.
Okay, cool.
Okay. So, having said all that, what I would like to do is well, we can do one of two things. Would people like to take a brief break before we get into our group activity? Does that sound good? Okay. So Rachel and Marta, you both came in after I got started. So we've just gone over the syllabus and the assignments. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. But what we're going to do now is, since we're talking about trends and issues in special education, we are going to engage in one of these issues, okay? And it's going to be the inclusion versus separate classroom debate, which is kind of one of the very first debates that really kind of got a lot of traction in the field of special education. You know, is it ideal to educate all students in the general education classroom, regardless of disability? Or does it actually make sense, you know, for some students to have kind of these separate classrooms, these pull-out services, by virtue of the fact that, you know, some of these challenges or learning differences are best addressed kind of in a smaller setting. So one cool thing about Zoom is that I can just randomly allocate you to two groups. So that's what I'm going to do. And then one group will be the pro inclusion group. The other group will be the pro separate classroom group. And so I'm going to give each group, I'm going to give you all 20 minutes to discuss within your groups a position on why your side of the debate is the ideal one. I'll ask you to present your positions independently, and then ask you all to kind of challenge one another, you know, challenge the positions that you were assigned. But before we do that, I think taking a break would be ideal. So what if we take 10 minutes, we come back here at it's 5:49, and we come back here at 6 o'clock. I will put you into the groups and we can get started. And again, I'll be popping my head into both groups and answering any questions, providing any clarification that you might need or might have, okay? Great. So we'll come back at 10 o'clock. I'm going to turn off my audio and video, and I will see you all in 10, okay? Thank you.
Sorry, I'm just moving upstairs, otherwise we're going to have two kids interrupting.
Well, I've been away from my child for about 2 weeks now. She's 3.5. It's the longest I've been away from her. My family's
that's
coming up
hard.
like next week, so I would gladly, I would love for my child to interrupt me right now.
That's hard. Are they coming up permanently next week?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. We own an apartment building in Oakland, California, and so my wife and daughter had to stay longer to see the transition of the new tenants into the apartment that we were living in. So.
Okay.
But anyway. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and put you into rooms, into two separate groups. Excuse me. Zoom calls them breakout rooms. And what I'll do is I'll pop my head in and tell you which side of the debate you're going to be on, okay? And things that I want you to consider when working together to develop your position in favor of what side of the debate you're on. For example, why is exclusion better for kids with special education? Why would it be better for students who are in general education without disabilities? How would it be better for, is it easier on the teacher, for example? Is one versus the other easier on teachers? In terms of resources, is one approach kind of more economically feasible than the other? Just some ideas to think about. And then I'll have you all come back after about 20 minutes and share your positions, and then we'll hopefully get into a nice argument. Is it? Yeah, okay, cool. So I'm gonna go ahead and create the rooms. Okay. Oh. Oh. Did that work? Okay, Lori. Cool. Okay, hello, breakout room number 1. You all will be the group who are proponents of an inclusionary approach to educating students with disabilities and learning differences, okay? So that's gonna be your position. So you'll have to have somebody possibly jot down some notes, so maybe establish a recorder, a somebody to
Facilitate.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be anything formal. It could be just bullet points. And I'm going to come into the other room and let them know what they're going to be doing.
Good.
Yeah, that's a whenever I did these in my class when I was doing general, like it was always when I was teaching environmental science, like I would just, pick what's going on in the world right now, and then they'd have to like immediately pick a side, and then they'd have to like study both sides and then argue with it, and they always would end up in the middle because I'm so confused now. Both sides are legitimate. I'm like, I know.
Okay.
Being an adult is hard.
I don't want to interrupt. Sorry to interrupt, but I have to.
Right.
So you all are going to be proponents of the separate classroom approach to special education, okay?
All right.
Okay. So take 20 minutes. Have somebody just jot down some notes so you remember kind of your argument for why this approach is better. And I'll pop my head back in a few minutes to answer any questions or anything you might have. Okay?
All right. Sounds good.
Cool.
Okay.
Okay, I peer role models for academic and behavior as well.
Could you add in there like peer tutoring?
Yeah.
They're exposed to the curriculum and hearing the vocabulary that's being used and the concepts that are being presented.
Exposed to vocab and vocab and concepts. Vocab concepts and vocab concepts and curriculum. That was the word. Okay.
I think it's good for the gen ed kids.
Great for the gen ed kids.
Very good.
It's great for the gen ed kids. We've, are out there telling them, and we hear these messages all the time, which is really important, that everyone is special, everyone is beautiful, everyone is important. And here we have a student in the classroom that may need a little more gentleness, that may need a little bit more patience, a little bit more kindness, that may do things that are kind of different. And it gives them an opportunity to put their money where their mouth is and say, yep, that kid's different.
You bring up a good point, Laura. It seems like it's most often the case that we place the burden of like adapting on the students with the disabilities, right?
Right.
We should be meeting halfway. Like we as people, neurotypical individuals, to use that term, should also, be kind of more aware and accepting of difference in behavior. So that's a good point. I like that.
And I feel like if we aren't teaching that in school, like if we're not teaching our gen ed students how to accept these students in a school, then are they ever going to accept them in a society? Probably not. Right. So building those skills within a structured setting where we can teach them how to appropriately handle students with disabilities would make them better fit for the society once they exit our schools.
Yeah.
Nice work, team. I'm gonna pop out. I'm just really digging this new feature.
Your SPED support all in, just kind of spread out and sprinkled and not as effective because it's spread out. It's all, it's like triage, all in one space.
Yeah. And then I was thinking about like in Germany for secondary school, for like high school, middle school, high school, they put kids on tracks, which I know a lot of people don't like.
Right.
But it is kind of nice that there's like the enrichment track, and then there's like kind of like everybody track, and then there's like kids who like they know they want to go to technical school, so they go into that, and it's like it starts building that skill right away, so they're like ready to enter the workforce. So there's that too, where there could be like different. I don't know. I think we could spin it where like instead of having it be like segregation, it's like tracks.
Yeah. Right. But at the same time, thinking what they're gonna say too is there's a lot of argument against tracking, because once you're in this track, that's your track. Like you're chugging along and you're not going to want to hop off that train because you're going to get hurt, kind of thing, and so once a kid is put in this like whatever track, then they're going to have a tough time getting out of it. I know that's what they would say.
They're trying to anticipate their argument.
Yeah. But that's why like the flooding of classrooms and the splitting up classrooms is really good for like elementary and
right.
Because depending on the class, it can be different separations. So like if you have a kid that's on an IEP for math, and then you're also supporting the kids, like if you have space in the IEP class for math, you could put, maybe that's against the rules because it's technically supposed to be separate. I don't know what
I would say no, because that makes sense, because it's kind of, at our level we have a lot of kids all over the place, and we have a lot of kids with pretty big gaps in their learning, but they're not SPED kids. They were just having a tough time in fourth grade or homeless or whatever, change a bunch of schools, and so they were learning their multiplication tables, and then they moved schools, and then now they are like already on division, and so now I have like 17-year-old kids that don't know how to do basic math. They're able to do, and so like having those like focus, like the separate groups can really help fill in gaps in knowledge for kids that aren't necessarily SPED, right?
Right.
But they still need that support. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, I just don't know if that's like technically not like a separate classroom.
We have the guy in here. Is that technically separate classrooms?
Say it again.
If we're talking about like being able to split kids based on what their level is for different subjects. So like if all of the sixth grade classes.
So like within the same classroom, but kind of separating them within the same room?
No, so like taking all of the there's 5 sixth grade classes. And so for math, they take all the kids who are like the enrichment kids and put them in one classroom with one teacher. They put kind of like the middle kids in different classrooms, and then they put the like IEP and really struggling kids in one classroom, and then that's where all the para support floods. So then that room can do that. But you can like do it differently depending on what the subject is. So say that it's like writing, all the kids, it could be different kids in different classrooms for different things. Is that
somebody who was kind of an anti-exclusionary model would say that that's essentially like segregation, right? Like you're
Right.
making this assumption that if these students just can't learn it, right? Even if they're exposed to it, they're not going to gain any benefit from it, right? So it's like kind of restricting access in a sense.
So that's the way we have to spin it. We can't like.
Well, you can spin it however you want. You got to just, I mean, if you can make the
So
argument.
what I'm saying is like.
I mean, I
instead of
can
access, we're
see
getting
the
more.
strength of that argument. It does make sense.
Okay.
We are able to learn about somebody's capabilities, especially in math. We have very good tools for measuring mathematical ability, and we can use those tools to create groups of students. And, I definitely see the merit in that argument. But,
Well, I mean, maybe a way to spin it would be sort of like, so would separate classrooms be like if we had, I don't know, like it's what we do at our school. It's like interventions and extensions, and so that's what we call it. But it's like the kids that like are the biggest one we have is for reading, right? So the kids that are like on the struggle bus with reading, they're in like my reading class, and then we have like middle of the road reading kids, and we have like the kids that are like have higher levels of reading abilities, and they're in like a more, we're all doing something similar, just at different levels. So we're all everyone would be able to get together and like talk about kind of what we're doing. We're all dealing with the same like kind of book and stuff, but the way I'm teaching it is just broken down smaller and slower, and then middle of the road, and then the extension, they're doing a lot more with it.
Right, which is like essentially what happens in
a more effective allocation of resources.
Yes.
Smaller student to teacher ratios. I mean, those are definitely benefits of, kind of these pull-out approaches. Well, good. You're doing good. We've got about 10 more minutes. I'm just going to check in with the other group and see how they're doing, okay?
All right. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
When new teachers are going through their teaching program, there needs to be a large chunk of their teaching program that focuses on special education in order to continue with their teaching program.
Get a preliminary teaching license.
Yeah.
That should be a component of it.
I started writing out my trends list, and teacher preparation was the very first one that I wrote down.
When I think about like my teaching or my college experience for becoming a teacher, like my placement for my student teaching was very different than all of my friends. I had a very difficult placement, and that was because I had 4 ED kids in my classroom who were constantly throwing desks, throwing scissors, breaking windows, the whole 9 yards. But that alone prepared me for what I was going to need to know in order to accommodate for every student in the same classroom. And all my, teacher friends that had the picture perfect 5th grade classroom, well, they're out of luck when they meet their first classroom with inclusion. So I think
Or
if teachers
have management problems with, it's, if you get that princess or that almost fantasy classroom, you're not prepared at all for what the real world's going to be. So.
I think there should be more like gauging of where we're placing our student teachers to where we know we're putting them in a challenging situation. First of all, that weeds out all the teachers that are like, never mind, don't want to be a teacher, not fit for this. And second of all, it gets you prepared for when you are on your own. Like you need to know how to do it when you're alone.
Yeah.
I know had I not been an EA first, a SPED EA first, and had a desk thrown at me, I never would be where I was at now. Yeah.
Same. Okay, so what other things besides the couple of things we've listed?
So what have you guys listed so far? I'm curious.
So we have social skills and the building and being around peer role models, academically being around peer role models, more exposure to vocabulary concepts and curriculum in the gen ed classroom. It's also great for the kids that are gen ed. We place the burden on the kids in special education adapt, but we should really be meeting halfway versus the students that are already in gen ed trying to adapt. So there should be the adaption should be halfway. Am I saying that right?
Adaptation.
Yeah, I wrote it down.
I knew what you were saying.
My notes are written funny. They're written very shorthand.
How do you combat the argument that like, well, some students require this very kind of one-on-one intensive intervention that they're not going to get in the classroom, in a general education classroom? How might you combat that argument? That's certainly one of the main arguments for why we should continue. We shouldn't shift to this kind of pure inclusion model, because there's always going to be students for whom that's not going to be the least restrictive environment. It's like an ideal, right? The lack of restriction is actually creating a restriction for some students.
Yes, but you'd have to assume that there's always going to be funding for special ed, and which means there's going to be a special ed teacher, there's going to be special ed IAs who can, in fact, push into that classroom and support that child. The same way we currently do, when we do push and support. Sometimes that is a one-on-one. You have to go sit with a specific child in a class that they are going to blow out in if you do not have the support they need. But
your argument is like, we need to be preparing all teachers to deal effectively and to provide effective instruction to students with a variety of behavioral and learning differences.
That was the next thing I was going to say. Gen Ed teachers don't always have the training to teach the SPED kids, and they need to have that training, and they need to be accepting of the students who are SPED. And we were taught how to teach diverse learners and to differentiate our instruction. And if we can't adapt our learning to those students, then we need to have the training to better adapt our lessons.
Yeah, we kind of put on the fact that all of us went to teacher prep programs that required us to write lesson plans that adapt to diverse learners. So if we all of a sudden get in a classroom and cannot do that, then that's the teacher failing the student. That's not the student with disabilities' fault for not understanding the way the content is being provided. And so our next point on that is, if you feel like you didn't get that in your teacher prep program, then it's your job as a teacher to advocate for yourself, tell your district, tell your principal, tell whoever that you need professional development in that area. When you have your organ and service day,
proactive and seeking out
that place that you want to go get training.
Right. Cool. Well, we got 5 more minutes, and I'm going to just check in with the other group. A lot of good stuff happening.
So one-on-one with every student, that's how it would be if it was like more inclusionary. And then with this way, it is, it's kind of like there's a focus support where it's needed.
Yes, exactly. So that's an economic thing we can talk about.
If you think about this, right? So kind of one ideal and kind of the inclusionary model is that, well, eventually we won't have the differentiation between special education and general education teachers. All teachers are going to be, trained to implement effective instruction for all students in an inclusionary setting. But would that not just lead to further separation, a larger gap between knowledge acquisition? But if you're using a very effective approach for instruction in a classroom with students who both do and do not have disabilities, well, chances are the students who do not have disabilities or learning differences are going to benefit even more from that very effective instructional approach. So you're actually it's going to lead to a situation in which kind of these differences become even more and more pronounced. Does that make sense?
Sort of.
So if you have
were you talking about the separate or the inclusionary?
The inclusionary. This could be an argument against the inclusionary model. That, well, if we put everyone in the same classroom and use this like perfect, like extremely effective form of instruction, well, yeah, maybe the students with learning differences will improve, but those students who don't have any are going to really improve because this approach is kind of so effective.
So your argument is that they would get too smart?
Right. Well, there would be too much of it. You would create an even bigger difference.
Right.
I was just thinking about that. Yeah. It doesn't have to be part of your position. I was just throwing it out there.
We can't have those kids getting too smart. They're gonna learn something.
I see what you mean. Like the gap would be bigger, and then it would be more difficult to to address the issues that those, like the deficits that those kids had. So then you'd have to keep like like eventually the kids who are the enrichment kids would get like to this point where they were just like bored, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
Because I think, I
Just
mean,
some
because
food for thought. I
the
don't know
problem
either.
I see, the problem I see with that, you know, is like the, you know, oh God, now my brain's all mixed up. The in 1 inch deep and a mile wide, like that could be like the inclusionary, right? It's like, oh, but teachers are experts on everything. It's like, not
Which
so
means you're not
much.
really an expert on anything. Is that what you're
Yeah,
saying?
and then whereas if they're
Jack
in
of all
those like
trades, master of none.
yeah, and then whereas in those like specialized groups, they're able to get, you know, you're working with, if you're, you know, a SPED kid and you're in those more intense groups, you're able to kind of drill down more to the problems, how to fix up, you know, and like and get that support, and you're able to focus more on your students because of the lower, you know, student teacher ratio, all that jazz.
Right, lower student to teacher ratio, greater individualization of instruction. I'm sure you guys have all talked about all this.
Yeah.
Increased curricular emphasis on like vocational and social skills. I mean, that's important, especially when we get closer to transition or get closer to graduation.
Another thing that randomly occurred to me is like, as so like with this could be with behavior or with academics, the kids who need the most help usually end up like kind of paired up with the kids who like need the most, like are doing the best kind of thing. And as a kid who was like the good girl in school and always got put with the behavior kid who was like needed to be redirected and never did the work, that got so frustrating. And it was like constantly having to like pull somebody else along, which is like, then it's hard to like, it's like a challenge in a teaching way. So like, maybe that's why I'm a special ed teacher. I don't know. But
I was just thinking like, maybe that's why you're a SPED teacher.
I know, but it's hard to like challenge a kid academically if they're always having to be paired with a kid that's like much lower. Like I know the argument is that like, well, if they have to teach it, then they're an expert at it. But like, if they're already an expert at it, then that's not really like adding.
But if you're having to teach it to a student who has behavioral challenges, well, it doesn't matter how much of an expert you are if you're not equipped to kind of deal with these very challenging behaviors and these impediments to learning. Well, it doesn't matter how expert you are in the material.
Right. So there's like an expectation too where like kids in a classroom, if there's a kid with like totally off the wall behaviors, they're kind of expected to just like deal with it and be accepting. But like it can seriously derail an entire classroom if there's like one kid who's like off
I think another plus for inclusion or this kind of separate classroom approach is that they've done studies where they interview students who are in these types of programs and they actually like them. They don't want to have kind of the individualized instruction in the context of the general education classroom because it's kind of different from what everyone else is doing. Maybe it's harder to focus. Like, you know, the separate classroom can actually be a benefit in that regard. But we have 20
my
seconds,
hardest kids,
okay? I'm gonna go check in with the other group.
Okay.
Normality. So everyone that's
10
in
more
there.
seconds, okay?
We're done. We're kind of just talking about our own settings now.
Yeah, and then some of the students from the Gen Ed High School, which is also a private school.
When I left, did you all get muted? I see that you all have your microphones off.
When we came back, it muted us.
Okay. Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah, I didn't realize when I close down the breakout rooms, it takes a minute to close down, like 60 seconds, literally. Okay, a lot of good ideas in favor of inclusion, in favor of a separate classroom approach. And so why don't we hear from the inclusion folks too? Why is it a better model, the inclusion approach to special education?
You want all aspects of our argument?
Yes, go ahead and lay it on us.
Okay, so first started with the aspect of social skills and the way that it benefits a special ed student to have peer models within the classroom, which also plays into the academic piece where not only are they academic role models of behaviors that we would expect in a classroom, but as well as peer tutors, so pairing up students with students with disabilities and being able to help them, I don't know, perform the right task in class. With a special ed student in the general ed classroom, it's giving them exposure to important vocabulary and content and just that general ed curriculum that they wouldn't be getting necessarily in a special ed classroom for the purposes of, I don't know, like I have 30 kids, and if they were all just in my classroom all day at the different levels that they're at, they wouldn't get a full curriculum ever. That's just, unless I had a million people to help me. We were talking about the benefits on the side of a gen ed student. I think we often force the special ed student to adapt and conform to the way a gen ed classroom works. But if we tailor it more to where the gen ed student and the special ed student have to meet in the middle to find grounds that make sense for all of them, it would be more fair. As well as like these gen ed students and special ed students, they're gonna be together in the real world eventually. Like we all have to exist together. So if we take the time while we have the kids in our schools to teach them inclusion and teach them how to interact with these students, they're gonna be more prepared for the real world. For example, one of the things we brought up within our group was some of these, high functioning kids are just gonna be like business owners or whatever someday. And we would hope that they would give an opportunity to an adult with disabilities to hold a job as well. And helping them understand different behaviors and different triggers and the way we talk to certain kids would really help them benefit later on. We did talk about a couple barriers that could be overcome in terms of teachers. We often see that gen ed teachers lack the training or ability to differentiate their lesson plans to meet diverse learners. But however, all of us decided that through our teacher prep programs, we were taught how to create lesson plans that were supposed to meet the needs of diverse learners. And if you're not willing to do that, then that's on the teacher for failing the student. That's not the special ed student's fault. And for new teachers who lack the ability to differentiate for that reason, need to be proactive. They need to go to their administration and ask for help and ask to go to a training or to be trained in some sort for professional development in the area of meeting the need of a special ed learner. That's about all we got.
Okay, so I'll provide a high-level overview. I was taking notes. So we have benefits in terms of exposure to typically developing peers in the areas of social development and academic development. Regarding academic development, the concepts and kind of vocabulary that are kind of age appropriate and that everyone else is learning. This could help a student with learning differences to fit in. And we have the opposite side of the coin. So the general education students are going to have important exposure to human variation, so to speak. And this is important because often we place the burden of change on the students with the disabilities, right? We think of like social skills groups or social cognitive therapy approaches for kids with autism, young adults with autism. We place the challenge of adaptation on the person who has kind of neurocognitive, difficulties with kind of learning these skills intuitively and applying them appropriately. And then teacher prep. So your position is that, you know, it is possible to include instruction and teacher preparation programs, experiences in these programs that will better prepare general education teachers to address the needs of a variety of students with a variety of learning differences and behavioral challenges. Okay. Everything you mentioned is something that has already, you know, been highlighted as a benefit of the inclusionary approach in the field of special education. So those of you in the separate classroom perspective, why is inclusion not necessarily the best approach to educating students with learning differences?
Okay.
Lay it on
I guess,
us.
yeah. So, Rachel and Amy and Daniel, feel free to jump in if you want to. Okay. So the first thing that came up was Rachel mentioned sort of how, now I'm drawing a blank. You were talking about the separate classrooms for the different levels. Did you want to explain that?
Sure. So I was thinking of how our sixth grade operates in middle school here, but like kind of on a next level. So the way that our sixth grade works is they're in the middle school, but they're in a separate area from the seventh and eighth grade. So it's kind of like a transitional year. So there are like 5 or 6 classrooms, I think 6. And then there is one special ed teacher that's just sixth grade. And so what they do is, like, for math time, they separate the classes. Everybody moves classes. So one teacher takes all of the like enrichment level kids. Then there's like the classes in the middle that are leveled, like, but they're all like in kind of the average, but like leveled more specifically in that. And then there's the classroom that has like all the kids who are on math IEPs plus the other kids who are really struggling in math. And that's the classroom that gets all the para support and all the paras flooded in there so that they can do even more differentiated instruction in that classroom. So that's like a separate approach that you could do for like every different subject, but kids, so that whatever subject a kid is in, the kids who have like the need in that area are the ones that get all of the extra support. And then there's also the ability, it also enriches you're able to enrich the enrichment class without having stuff that's just going over the head of everybody else. So that's kind of what I was thinking. And then I was also thinking of like in the secondary level, how that going into like a track system like they have in Germany or other European countries, where there's focus on like, there's the kids who know that they want to do like, say they know they want to go into welding, they want to do welding, or they want to do carpentry, or they want to do whatever kind of vocational track. Then they can start focusing on that, and they leave being like a highly qualified person who can be employed. So like for a lot of my kids who have like very severe learning disabilities but are very good at those kind of things, I could see how that could be incredibly empowering. Because all of a sudden, instead of the goal being to have a diploma and go to college, which is just not a realistic goal for everybody, and there's a lot of value in vocations where you don't need a diploma, they could leave feeling empowered and being prepared to be a highly qualified, competent person in whatever field they want to be. And then at the same time, there's all these tracks for other kids. So it ends up being an empowering thing as opposed to like, you have to sit in the basement.
Right.
Right.
Well, and then
like important in the development of self-determination, right? Kind of autonomy.
Yeah.
You get to choose.
And so the way we're seeing those separate classrooms isn't just like, oh, this is the SPED class that they're isolated in this one day. It's just separate levels. So like what you were saying with that example, if you have a kid that is, you know, maybe they're like a kid with autism, but they're really strong in math, they're going to be in that higher level math, getting those extensions. But when it comes to other areas, maybe they're going to have a separate place to work on their social skills. And so they're still getting a little bit of inclusion, but also, you know, more focused attention where it's needed. And then some of the benefits of that is there's those smaller student teacher ratios. And was it you're saying? Because if you had everyone included all the time, you would, for a lot of these kids with really high behaviors, you're going to have like one-on-one support sprinkled throughout, and that's just not financially, it's just not going to happen, and so focusing the support where it's needed. Yeah, McKenna.
I just have a quick question.
Yeah.
Because I think I heard Rachel say this right, so correct me if I'm wrong. You said that even in the class where you had to pull some students to, hold a lower level class, that it could also have gen ed students in it, correct?
Yeah.
That's how it is at the 6th grade. So like, I don't know what the rules are for the hypothetical argument. It could not in this. I don't know.
No, that's fine.
But
I was just wondering because in terms of like this argument, isn't that still inclusion because it still would be considered a gen ed classroom? Because we're not serving a gen ed student in SPED.
I guess the idea is like, if you had this kind of thing, then you wouldn't even need kids to be qualified as SPED because everyone would be getting the services anyway. So no matter what, it just would be leveled based on whatever they need. So like, there wouldn't even need to be IEPs really, except for like really, really high needs, like medical need kids.
I was just trying to clarify.
Yeah. So maybe that like is.
This is our ideal world here. We're creating an educational utopia.
I'm following. I just wanted to know that.
I actually asked that in our separate group. I was like, I don't know if this is against the rules, but like in my ideal world, this is what the ideal like separate thing would be.
I was like, hold up, is that not inclusion? But
yeah. So I guess
by
in this ideal
virtue
world,
of like the challenges that many students with disabilities have in the classroom, they always all end up in like the kind of the lower performing groups in your ideal world, Rachel.
Come on, Mama.
Sorry, I got attacked by a 2-year-old. Come on. Can you say your question again?
So let's say that your model is put into practice, and we have kind of these classrooms that are not based on like any kind of disability category or diagnosis, but instead on just ability in the subject.
Right. Yeah.
Might it still occur that, or might it still happen that all of the people with disabilities end up in like kind of the lower functioning, like the lower performing group, and so now you're kind of back to square one?
I don't think if it was done correctly. So I'm like kind of in that model, I'm thinking of the kids with like specific learning disabilities, not really necessarily the kids who are like very high needs because of like serious deficits, either intellectually or like physically. So obviously they would need like a separate situation because of those limitations. But I was thinking more for like the specific learning disability type kids. So like most of the kids that I have don't have like everything.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry.
I know. Sorry, she's running back in here. I know, honey. Sorry. But
Don't be sorry.
The other thing we were talking about is like the kids who have really high behavior needs because of some kind of mental health issue or because of something going on in their life, and how it's really beneficial for them to have some sort of like specialized classroom or even like in treatment programs that they can go to work specifically on those things with like a therapeutic team, so that they can end up with the skills that they need, that they wouldn't have you wouldn't have the skills in just like the general education classroom to help them with those issues. But then they could of course re-enter it, but that's like a separate situation where kids are temporarily separated, but it's necessary for their mental health and for their safety a lot of the time, and the safety of others too.
Right. So something that the inclusion group mentioned as a benefit is that kids with disabilities are going to benefit from peer tutors, from typically developing peer tutors.
That's funny.
And I heard an interesting counterpoint to that in the exclusionary group.
Yeah, we said the opposite because Rachel was getting like her experience, and as my experience too is a lot of times when you're in that inclusionary classroom, the kids that need the most help are often paired up with the kids that are that are we'll call them like the high flyer kind of kids, like they're doing good, they're doing great, they're going along, and so that can get really
Tiresome.
discouraging and draining. Yeah, for those kids, like, oh God, you know, it's.
But haven't we been trained to not pair the highest with the lowest? Aren't we supposed to do something like kind of in the middle with the low and kind of in the middle with the high?
Well, yeah,
Like,
we have.
We have.
We have,
Yeah,
but I
like,
think
that's part of our argument is if we were preparing teachers, gen ed teachers besides us, to understand that type of mentality, like that's the way it's supposed to be. We should not be draining these high flyers with these kids that just don't get it. Then we would have a model that's attainable for those special ed kids to follow. Some ones that's just right above them that they can build a little bit of skill with without totally depleting your entire classroom.
thinking more like the kids who have like kind of the more extreme behavior difficulties being paired with the kids who are the ones that can like handle their behavior difficulties, because I don't even know who else you would pair them with unless you had them in a separate classroom, and that gets really draining because I could just see a kid who is like the good kid who's constantly trying to do everything they're supposed to do being constantly paired with like Johnny, who's like climbing on tables and like spitting on them all the time, and all of a sudden the kid who like was doing great and loved school like hates school because essentially they're like the warden.
Hey, Jared,
in that situation,
debating with them?
it ends up coming to pass that the exposure isn't beneficial. Like it can create resentment toward the kid who, you know, has behavioral challenges.
Jared?
Oh, McKenna, yes.
Am I supposed to be debating with them or am I not supposed to be debating with them?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Oh, please do.
Let's have a discussion.
Argue
Because,
with
I mean,
us.
I didn't know
what
if I
we're
was
doing and
supposed
talking
to
about right now is
supposed to be
like
talking.
emblematic of the situation. I mean, there are numerous positions on the matter.
If the biggest worry is behavior, which I totally get because my student teaching placement was all behavior with ED kids who have experienced trauma, isn't that then the purpose of a behavior support room, which is not special education, all students have access to de-escalate students when it comes to outbursts and behaviors? Like I'm doing this from experience from a school I was placed at. We were lucky enough, I know not every elementary school has this, but to have a behavior support room, and it had 2 staff in it that was staffed all day long, and we had to budget for it, so obviously it's like big. But yeah, so students, when they're feeling escalated, teachers are trained on how to realize when there's a stimulus or a trigger that's starting to escalate a child, offer them a safe place to take a break. Staff member can always come and get them, walk them down to the calm down room, and they stay there until they're completely de-escalated. So we're not seeing those outbursts, we're not seeing those tantrums, and then, you know, the gen ed peer is not getting the fallout of having.
That's all dependent on a budget. Capable of supporting.
Yeah, also, even if you have that, like we have that in my school for the first time this year. And so we're kind of like going through the pitfalls of trying to like make that a system that works. But the issue we're having is that we have a group of kids that's one particular grade this year that just, there's like 6 kids with extreme behaviors in every single class, in all 3 classrooms.
That's how ours was. Like, I'm like, I'm feeling for you.
Yeah. And so it's like one of those things where that works, but it gets like overloaded really quickly because there's only 2 staff and there's like, you know, so many
One
kids.
thing that our school did to counteract for that, because if 3 kids are blowing out at the same time, like, what do? You know? And so what we started trying, which seemed to work, we didn't try it till the spring, so it's kind of like, I wish we would have started that in the fall, was also scheduling breaks for kids to come in at different times. And most of the time that would then encourage the student to work efficiently leading up to their break, because they knew they would have an activity that they liked. And they knew that if they weren't going to do that, then they weren't going to get that activity. It was going to just be a de-escalation, and that's not fun for them. So that decreased a ton of our big blowout behaviors so that they weren't occurring at the same time in the same classroom. Because ours was all across the grade level as well. And each classroom had about 3 of them, so it was about 9. But that was a good tool that we tried to use to counteract that big problem, because we had that initially as well.
So this is good. I mean, you're speaking to a very important kind of factor and that contributes to the success or the failure of an inclusionary program, and that's the resources available to the school. You have these behavioral specialists. You have these, you know, these rooms in which, you know, there are trained professionals to help kids de-escalate when they, you know, whether they're experiencing, you know, kind of sensory overload or, you know, anxiety or frustration.
I think a lot of it depends on space too. I was working in a room earlier this week where I was the teacher that responded to the students who were having the behaviors, and I ended up having to stay with one student for a very large chunk of my day rather than running the groups that I was supposed to run. And then at the end of the day, another student had a large blowout and he ended up coming to me, but there's no set space for them to go to. And so they ended up coming to the room that I was working in as the resource room. Right. And as the resource room teacher, it worked out great, you know, because they knew who I was and they were able to calm down, and that's the room that they use, but there's no defined space either. So when there's no defined space, it's like, well, what are you supposed to do?
Right.
So
yeah.
I mean, it's definitely a factor.
That was one of our
physical space.
Yeah, that was one of the points we kind of made as a benefit of those separate instruction areas. It was something we kind of noticed with is that a lot of times those places where it's like, you know, you're teaching a lot of kids with special needs, they just are considered a safe space by a lot of students, and you know, like they want to stay there. They don't, even if they're ready to leave, they don't want to leave. And so having that be the benefit of those of teaching in those separate areas is because it is a safe space. You know, they feel a little more comfortable. They're not like the weird kid flipping tables or like making duck noises when they don't understand their multiplication or whatever.
Right.
It's a safe space, and it allows them to grow when they feel safe.
It's pretty interesting to me because like we had that same kind of situation at my school as well, where like my kids, if they're going to blow out, they come to the resource room, and that's just how it is. And typically they don't want to leave, but it's a safe place for them to calm down and nobody is judging them. But we also have a large number of gen ed kids who are actually our biggest behavior at our school, and they use my room for the same exact thing. So I am the room that every teacher sends their kid to when they need to de-escalate or just get them out of their room, you know, whatever it is. And so when it gets to that point, am I a resource room or am I a behavior support room? Because I'm supporting behaviors all day long, and it does take away from academics that I should be teaching my kids.
You're both, McKenna. You're both. You get to
I only get paid for one, Erin. So
that brings us to resources.
You're 2 crowns.
Here's another thing. So like kind of one of what you often see was the first point that the inclusion group brought up. And that is that, you know, kids with learning differences, they're just going to benefit from being in the general education classroom. Like they're going to see like these exemplary models of like social behavior, and they're just going to learn from observing that. And somehow that's, you know, that's going to be an effective means of instruction. But is that always the case?
No.
No, not at all. I mean, kids with autism often require direct, intensive, one-on-one kind of instruction to kind of teach these concepts of social skills and like kind of social thinking. So that's kind of, you know, it's often an argument for, you know, kind of one of the pieces of this argument, but it's not necessarily, you know, something that has been shown kind of, you know, through research to be effective. So that was just another point that I wanted to bring up. Well, this was good, guys. I mean, I think it was a fruitful discussion, you know, and, you know, just the fact that we, you know, as teachers and researchers in the field hold such kind of like strong positions on this matter. I mean, just kind of speaks to the bigger picture, and that's that, you know, there isn't a one size fits all for the problem, right? You know, the least restrictive environment does not have to be the general education classroom for everyone. There needs to be a continuum of placement options, right? some that, entail 20% time in the general education classroom and 80% out in pull-out services, maybe half and half for kids who are kind of more severely impaired by their disabilities. Maybe they're just with their typically developing peers at lunchtime or recess, right? So certainly there's, when I force you to take like these extreme positions, well, neither one is correct. So we're at 6:50. I think that was a nice session. Does anyone else have any closing comments, questions, anything else? Speak now or forever hold your peace.
Can I just ask a random question?
Yes, McKenna.
Yeah. I'm just kind of curious what each of your guys' caseloads are. How many kids?
Like number wise?
Yeah. And how many paras?
Who do you want to go first?
Can I go first? Because I'm 0. I'm 0.
Yes,
oh yeah, she's
Sorry, I'm a sub. I'm special.
I currently have a caseload of 9.
Okay.
I'm also 0. I don't have a caseload because we have specialists that do all the other stuff. We have a transition specialist and counselors.
So I'm one of 2 resource room teachers, and so I plan all my instruction and I'm my own case manager. And right now I have 27 kids on my caseload, but I have about 3 or 4 in referral too. Last year I got up to 35 at the end of the year before they moved me to the one school.
How many
and
paras
so
do you have?
my coworker is the same. So we co-teach and we plan all of our instruction together for about 60 kids, and then we split the caseload. But we also have our case manager.
How many IAs do you have?
We have one. Well, we just got permission, basically approval to hire a second full-time person, and we did the interviews today, so that's why I was late. But we have 2 full-time and 1 half-time, and then we're kind of in like negotiations for ways to get one-on-ones because we got all these kids. Our SLC classroom got turned into a behavior classroom, so we like inherited SLC kids who had one-on-ones, but then we lost the funding for one-on-ones. So like they don't have them right now, or they have half ones that are substitutes that we're having to share. So in our room, 2.5, but then it's kind of murky with these other kids who we got because basically our program got like sort of changed at the last minute.
Okay.
So
sorry, Rachel, for clarification, what is SLC?
Structured Learning Center. So like it was like more more impaired kids in just like various ways, but now it's like just behavior classroom.
Okay. Thank
so
you.
It's so like before it's basically like kids can't be in the gen ed classroom all the time, but they also are not to the extreme where they need to go to like our day treatment, like our in treatment kind of things that are connected to the school. So we have those 2, which are more therapeutic. So this is like the step in between, but it's the first year that we've had that, so everything's kind of like
a hot mess.
Yeah.
I have a caseload of 30 right now with 2 parapros that are not quite full-time. And then they hired a half-time SPED teacher to work with me. And she has I think she has 10, but she also is doing all of my 504s.
Anybody else?
Oh yeah, and I don't have to do 504s, but we have to do all the behavior plans.
We probably have I'm going to say she probably has 20 kids and I have 30 with the 5, including the 504s.
I went from having 26 last year with 4 IAs because a couple were one-on-one and one was CTP and one was LRC. And now I have 31 kids and I only have 1 IA. And I
Whoa.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So with a caseload of 30 students, what is the maximum number of students you'll have at once?
Me?
You tell me because they send me my kids every period out of gen ed.
Okay,
That's
all of
because
them.
they don't know how to differentiate for any of them.
Oh,
That sucks.
So they're
Yeah,
all
that's not
just
okay.
Yeah.
Another
Kind of-
current issue in special education, lack of qualified teachers.
right.
Yeah.
Huge one.
Well,
That's on my list too there, McKenna. We were talking about our list.
there you go.
That was number
I mean,
2.
it's not that bad, but like when you feel like you're being stretched in every direction trying to help every kid when they're in there and you can't,
Right.
I'm like, hire somebody else for me, but that's
Right.
not gonna happen.
well, that's
It's
like in my
this
school.
This thing that's supposed to be helping is actually not, because I'm
That's
so.
when you start calling for the administration's help to come and help you because you're stretched to the brink.
My administration's the one that's pushing to get me another IA.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
Well, at least you got that
He
going
has
for you.
two like severely disabled children. So he totally understands SPED world, and his wife is a special ed director in the neighboring district.
Mhm.
So like they get it, but it's like our district likes to say, well, we just can't afford it when we know they can.
Yeah, that's what you call BS.
I'm like, if you
Well,
can
guys,
afford
hey,
it, you go to school.
This is, we could go on and on, but we're getting close to our ending time. Thank you all. This was a very productive session. I like doing this kind of, you know, back and forth more than me just talking at you showing slides. So I'm gonna try to incorporate more of this as we move forward. But thanks again for your participation, and I will be seeing you all next week. Okay? Have a good weekend.
On Wednesday, right?
Wednesday.
Wednesday from now on.
Yeah, we're just gonna do Wednesdays, every other Wednesday. So I'm good. I didn't even think about that. Again, this is speaking to my inexperience in this type of program, but now I know. You all taught me an important lesson, so I appreciate it. Thank you.
So no more Thursday classes.
Yeah,
Thank you.
even the teacher learns.
Thank you.
Bye, guys. Have a good weekend.
Bye.
Thank you.